The parade ground fell silent the moment the new cadet refused to speak her name. Dawn light spilled across Falcon Ridge Base, cool and pale, washing the gravel in silver as the formation held perfectly still. The flag snapped in the crosswind, 8 to 10 knots, rolling off the desert flats, tugging at uniforms and whispering through the metal rails that bordered the muster square. It was 0600 the hour when discipline was supposed to be unquestioned. And yet there she stood, late transfer Cadet Mara, silent, unreadable eyes fixed forward as though she were listening to something no one else could hear. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from and who's the hero in your family. General Elias Rourke watched her from the front line, the weight of command heavy in his stance. He was a man built of granite habits and carved routines, a commander whose voice could strip the paint from a barracks door. The silence from Mara hit him wrong. It wasn't defiant in the usual way. No tension in her shoulders, no tremor, no fear, simply absence, as if she were somewhere else entirely. He stepped forward, boots grinding against the gravel. "Cadet," he said, "state your full name for muster." Not even a blink. The cadets around her exchanged glances, quick, uncertain flickers. Captain Jacques Teller, standing off to the side with a clipboard, lowered his pen. Everyone could feel it, the odd stillness radiating off the woman who wasn't following the script. Rourke's jaw locked. "Cadet, this is Command Actual. You will acknowledge." Mara shifted only enough to indicate she'd heard him. No salute, no verbal reply, just the slightest incline of her head. And somehow that small gesture irritated him more than outright disobedience. You transfer in overnight and think regulations don't apply to you. His gaze dropped to her hair, dark and long enough to brush her collar. "You want to walk onto my parade ground with that mess? Explain yourself." "I can't," she said quietly. 3 clipped syllables, controlled even. The sort of tone one used when each word had been weighed and sharpened before release. Rourke stepped closer. "You can't, or you won't." She didn't answer. The wind carried the distant growl of an A-10 passing high overhead, its shadow sliding like a blade over the field. Mara didn't look up. Her breathing stayed steady, too steady for a cadet getting chewed out by a 2-star. Rourke narrowed his eyes. Something was off, something he couldn't yet place. "All right," he said. "If you won't follow grooming regs, you won't keep the hair." "Barber?" The base barber, an older enlisted man with forearms like tree trunks, stepped out from behind the line with a pair of clippers in hand. The cadets stiffened. Even Teller flinched. Punitive haircuts were rare, reserved for outright insubordination, but Rourke wasn't bluffing. "Sir Teller," began, but Rourke lifted a hand. She made her choice. Mara didn't move. She didn't plead. She simply pivoted, one smooth, deliberate step, and knelt on the small stool the barber dragged out. The posture was calm, almost ritualistic. If she felt shame, it didn't reach her face. That bothered Rourke the most. A normal recruit would be shaken, cursing, anything. Instead, she looked as though she'd done this before, somewhere far harsher than Falcon Ridge. The first pass of the clippers tore through the silence, a quick, aggressive buzz that made a ripple pass through the formation. Strands of dark hair fell across her shoulders and scattered at her feet. Mara didn't even blink. Her hands rested loose on her knees. Her breathing never changed rhythm. The barber hesitated at one point, glancing at Rourke as if to confirm he should keep going. Rourke gave a single nod. The buzzing resumed. By the time he was finished, Mara's hair was cropped close, stark, against the line of her jaw. She stood without being told, brushing loose strands from her collar. Her expression held no anger, no protest, only a quiet resignation that unsettled the cadets more than the punishment itself. Rourke stepped forward again, studying her. "Maybe now you'll remember where you stand." She met his eyes for the first time. There was something layered, there's something measured and cold, but buried deep, as if behind reinforced steel. "Understood," she said, 2 syllables this time, still calm, still wrong. As she returned to her place in formation, her footsteps barely disturbed the gravel. Cadet Nolan Sharp, standing 2 rows back, leaned toward the trainee beside him. "She walked like she's done more than basic," he muttered. "Way more." His friend elbowed him to shut up, but the observation was already circulating like a whispered current. Mara moved with precision, not hesitation, not the awkward stiffness of someone new. Some of the older cadets instinctively shifted to give her space. Unsure why, only sensing that something about her presence didn't match her file. Rourke addressed the formation again, voice rougher now. "Let this be a lesson. Regulations exist for a reason. If you want to serve here, you follow them. No exceptions." But even as he spoke, he found his gaze drifting back to her. That silent refusal, the steady breathing, the absolute lack of panic. She had absorbed a public humiliation with the composure of someone used to far worse. He didn't like mysteries, especially not mysteries that walked onto his base in the middle of the night with half a file and no explanation. "Dismissed," he barked. The formation broke. Cadets peeled away in tight rows toward the barracks. Mara moved with the group, her cropped hair glinting in the rising sun. But she wasn't joining their conversations or matching their pace. She walked in self-contained silence, as if listening for something beneath the noise of the training grounds. At the edge of the field, a radio clipped to a nearby guard's vest crackled with a faint burst of static, barely noticeable, quick, almost accidental. But Mara paused for a fraction of a second, as if she recognized the pattern, the cadence of it before continuing on. Teller watched her go, unease tightening his chest. Rourke's punishment should have rattled her. Instead, it had revealed something else entirely, something he couldn't yet name, but instinct told him was important. Rourke remained on the parade ground long after everyone left. His eyes stayed fixed on the path Mara had taken. He wanted to dismiss the feeling gnawing at him, but the wind carried another whisper of radio static from the guard post. Another quick coded burst, and he felt a chill slide beneath his collar. "Late transfer cadets," he muttered. Nothing but trouble, but even he didn't believe it. And while he didn't know it yet, the next time that radio crackled, every assumption he'd made about her would begin to unravel. The distress call hit the comdeck like a detonation. "Wraith 1, do you copy?" Vega froze, fingers hovering above the keyboard, her eyes narrowing as the encrypted burst repeated. The frequency blinked on 9.452 megahertz, a channel reserved for deep cover operations, the kind of signal that should never surface in a routine base morning. She glanced at Rourke, standing rigid behind the console bank, jaw tight, hands clenched. His authority had been absolute yesterday. Now uncertainty etched lines across his face. "Break priority, override," she called into the empty room, heart hammering. The radio chirped in fragmented bursts, each one a test. A handshake requiring authentication, and the name Mara Kellen was embedded in its coded syntax. Rourke's mind raced. He had punished her yesterday, humiliated her in front of the formation, and yet here she was quiet, unseen, suddenly central to the survival of his base. Lock down the comms. All personnel secure. Assume enemy spoofing, he barked, voice taut. The cadets obeyed instantly, scrambling to follow protocol. But no one touched Mara. She had returned to her quarters early, but Vega's instincts told her the cadet was listening, calculating. The terminal pinged again, this time with an auto-authentication code. The system recognized her identity. Mara Kalin, Clarence Blacktear, deep cover asset. The words burned across Rourke's vision. Deep cover, not a cadet. The file he had dismissed as a late transfer was a ghost operative, trained for missions that made Falcon Ridge look like a playground. He stepped closer, squinting at the screen, fingers drumming the console. The room seemed smaller, air thicker, as the weight of his mistakes settled on him. Pierce appeared in the doorway moments later, body leaning heavily on a rail, sand and blood streaking his fatigues. His suppressed 9mm hung loose in a tactical grip, the weight of recent operations evident in every muscle. "Where's Wraith One?" he rasped, voice cracking with fatigue. His eyes locked on Mara's name in the terminal. "Without her, we die," he whispered, collapsing into a chair beside the map console. The threat vector displayed 42 kilometers from the base, hostile units advancing faster than expected, and the margin for error evaporated. Mara emerged from the shadows of the hallway, hair cropped short, eyes sharp, voice calm. "I'm here," she said. Not a cadet anymore, not a recruit. Command flowed naturally from her stance, from the unspoken authority she carried. Rourke's chest tightened. The woman he had shamed, the one who had allowed her hair to be cut without protest, now radiated control he couldn't match. She assessed the tactical map silently, calculating distances, engagement windows, and probable enemy maneuvers, all in a heartbeat. Vega keyed a series of commands under Mara's direction, her fingers flying over the console as the terminal verified encrypted authorizations. Every flash of code confirmed it. She was the handler, the ghost operative. Rourke stood frozen, the words "command actual" echoing in his head as he realized the full scope of his error. He had punished the one person whose competence alone could save the base. The humiliation, the confusion, the authority he thought he wielded it, all unraveled in that instant. Pierce coughed, drawing a rag across his mouth, eyes never leaving Mara. "We're running out of time. Hostiles are closing in. Without her guidance, extraction is impossible." His tone carried the kind of fear and urgency Rourke had never witnessed from his own officers. The two men exchanged a glance, one steeped in regret, the other in raw exhaustion, while Mara took control, assigning overwatch points, communication, relay checks, and rapid response teams. Her voice was precise, measured, leaving no room for hesitation. Rourke stepped back, allowing the cadets and NCOs to follow her lead. He watched as she coordinated movements, issued commands with surgical timing, and anticipated every variable the advancing forces might exploit. A sense of disbelief clung to him, bitter and undeniable. The base had been blind to her identity, blind to her skills, and yet she had operated with the clarity of someone who had seen far more chaos than he could imagine. Vega leaned closer to the radio bank, hands steady now, repeating each of Mara's orders, confirming encrypted relays. Pierce watched her like a lifeline, nodding as she instructed him to hold position until the safe extraction window opened. The pattern of her thought, the calm in her decisions, and the depth of her operational awareness made it impossible for Rourke to look away. Every hesitation he had felt yesterday had been a mistake. He had assumed defiance where there was discipline, silence where there was strategy. Minutes stretched like hours as Mara mapped the enemy approach, coordinated defensive placements, and synchronized response teams. Her presence had shifted the weight of the day, converting panic into controlled motion, indecision into clear priorities. Rourke's own hands, which had been ready to command, now rested at his sides. He was a spectator, watching a cadet-turned-operator rewrite the rules of engagement in real time. As the initial threat vectors were confirmed, Mara's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Rourke. "Prepare for full engagement in T-minus 15, she said, every syllable carrying authority. He swallowed, lips dry. Realizing that the punishment he had inflicted yesterday now seemed insignificant, almost absurd in contrast to the capability standing before him. The enormity of the oversight pressed down on him, mingling with the adrenaline coursing through the command center. Rourke exhaled slowly, the first acknowledgement of error slipping past the rigid lines of his jaw. Mara had stepped fully into the role he had underestimated, turning the flow of information, decisions, and action in a direction none of them could have predicted. The base was alive with controlled motion, guided by her instincts and experience, and Rourke finally understood that respect, not rank, dictated the order of survival here. And as the tactical map blipped with hostile positions closing in, the realization sank in that the woman he had humiliated was the single factor that could turn the coming chaos into a managed response, and without her, Falcon Ridge would crumble. The next time Mara issued a command, it would redefine every expectation Rourke had ever held about who was truly in charge. General Rourke froze when Mara stepped into the ops center, no longer a cadet, but the ghost commander he'd heard rumors about for years. The hum of computers filled the cavernous room, the glow of tactical monitors painting pale reflections across the polished floors. Orange alert lights flashed intermittently, casting long shadows of soldiers and NCOs hunched over consoles. The countdown clock ticked relentlessly. T8 o'clock, Rourke's boots felt heavy against the floor as he realized the woman he had humiliated was now the axis of control, the single operator capable of directing the Reshape response unit that would determine the fate of Falcon Ridge. Mara moved with deliberate precision, her cropped hair still damp from yesterday's punishment, eyes sharp as a hawk's, scanning every tactical readout. Her presence shifted the energy in the room. Orders were no longer hesitant or delayed. Soldiers looked to her instinctively, voices catching in the throats of those unused to following anyone but Rourke. He opened his mouth to speak, to reclaim some semblance of authority, but the words died when she called out WRAITHH actual to all units, confirm positions and secure perimeter. Overwatch teams deploy 400 meters out. Drones, 18-kilometer recon sweep now. The calm certainty in her tone left no room for debate. Vega, her hands steady over the console, relayed commands to the rapid response teams, each keystroke validating the authority embedded in Mara's call sign. Pierce, still bandaged and dusty, followed her directions with a mixture of relief and awe, obeying each tactical instruction without hesitation. Rourke's throat tightened. The realization hit him with a cold weight. This was not a cadet he had punished, but a master of battlefield orchestration. "Command actual," Mara said without turning toward him. "Coordinate extraction for Unit Bravo. Use the western access routes, drones, to cover the breach sector. I need visual confirmation of all hostiles before they close within 500 meters. Every syllable was deliberate. Each command layered with contingencies. Rourke's mind raced to keep up, to find a role for himself in the operation, but she already had the threads of every unit, every angle, woven into a coherent plan. The monitors blinked as the drones launched, sweeping the terrain in 18-kilometer arcs, their feeds overlaying the tactical map with moving blips, shadows of enemy units advancing. Mara's eyes flicked between screens, making micro-adjustments, issuing new coordinates. Team Alpha, engage at 430 meters. Team Delta, hold until visual confirmation. Suppressors only no alert until engagement. The rapidity and precision of her directives left Rourke stunned. The operator he had punished yesterday was now orchestrating a counterstrike with a surgical hand. Pierce's suppressed 9mm was ready, eyes locked on the screens, showing his escape path. He nodded to Mara, voice low but firm. "I copy, Wraith Actual, engaging on your mark." She acknowledged him with a single glance. No unnecessary words, no hesitation. The hostile units approached, their silhouettes creeping closer along the mapped corridor. Unaware that every step had been anticipated, calculated, and countered. Rourke swallowed hard as he watched the operation unfold. The tension he had carried yesterday, the pride that had demanded obedience and submission, evaporated under the force of her competence. Every decision he might have issued was already accounted for, every contingency covered. The Rapid Response Unit moved as a single organism, synchronized under Mara's command, while he remained on the sidelines, a witness to the scope of his mission. Drone feed confirms enemy breach at Sector 6. "Initiate intercept," Mara ordered, her voice sharp and unwavering. Suppressed rifle cracks echoed through the live feeds as teams moved with flawless coordination, neutralizing hostiles before they could gain ground. Every tactical adjustment was precise, fluid, and instinctive. Rourke's chest tightened, a mix of awe and guilt settling over him. The countdown clock edged relentlessly toward 0, but Mara's focus never wavered, anticipating every movement, every threat. Orders flowed seamlessly through the ops center, and Pierce's team reached extraction points under drone overwatch, every path secured. As the last enemy was confirmed neutralized, Mara allowed herself a brief nod. The tension in the room dissolved. Soldiers relaxed. Rourke stepped forward, humbled, and saluted. She returned it with a measured nod, hair short, eyes sharp, identity fully restored. She gathered her gear methodically, every movement precise, before heading toward the exit ramp. Rourke watched, the magnitude of his error and the extent of her capability settling into a quiet, hard-earned respect. The base had been saved, the threat neutralized, and the woman he had misjudged walked away with the authority she had always commanded. And as Mara disappeared onto the outbound aircraft, Rourke knew that Falcon Ridge had just witnessed the emergence of a commander whose legend would ripple far beyond the walls of the base.